Hey everybody, Greg Cazillo from Cazillo.com. Today's video, I'm going to go over VR. Should you use it? Should you buy a lens with it? I've got a ton of questions and a lot of information, and that's actually why I'm switching to this different format today. And I wanted to try it out because in some videos lately I've forgotten some information that I wanted to include. So I thought this might be a better way to keep my my ideas and my thought process on track without missing anything. So we're going to try it out. Let me know what you think. Anyway, why you should and why I already use VR/OS/IS sparingly. Well, what's wrong here? It's not hitting the button. There's the button. Okay. What is VR/IS/OS? VR from Nikon stands for vibration reduction. IS from Canon stands for image stabilization. And OS from Sigma is optical stabilization. Simply put, it's a single element or group of elements in a lens that compensates for detective camera motion. Detected. Huh? What is that? Basically, we can't hold our cameras completely still. It's as simple as that. That's why your normal, quote-unquote, minimum shutter speed, minimum shutter speed is 1/60th of a second to make sure that there's no issues, there's no camera shake, there's no anything. So that's kind of the unwritten rule, kind of the old school rule is 1/60th of a second. Now, VR can definitely help it produce sharper images. There's no doubt about that. The research has been done. It is a good product. It is a good mode, and you can use it. But that doesn't mean you should be using it all the time, and that's the key to this video. Now, when you do have longer lenses, you're going to have more camera shake. Basically, when you are zoomed in, and this is a 200mm lens, when you are zoomed in, that camera shake is magnified. Just like taking a pair of binoculars, and especially a real long pair of binoculars, you get a lot of shake, and it's really moving, and it's hard to hold them still. It's the same thing with a longer lens. It's harder to keep that image still, which means you have a greater chance of having more shake or having a blurry photo because of that camera shake. Now, the old school method was to just increase your shutter speed to 1 over your zoom position. So once again, if I'm shooting my 70-200 lens here, or if it was a 300, we would apply the same thing, any lens basically. But if I'm shooting my 70-200 at 200mm, I would make sure that my shutter speed is at least 1/200th of a second or higher, and that should get rid of any camera shake. Simple as that. For the most part that I found, it works. I've had no trouble with it. So, that's the old school way before VR, and it would always work for me. Simple. Here's the meat and potatoes of this video. Number one, VR needs to be off by default because it is not a set and forget mode. You don't want to just leave it on. I'm going to go through that, so trust me and stick with me here. Turn it off when using a tripod or a monopod, but with a little bit of a but there. Now, Nikon, I did the research on Nikon. They say that if your lens is mounted on a tripod and it's a stable tripod, to turn it off with certain lenses, only certain lenses. But if it's turned, how did they put it? If they have the tripod on a certain kind of head that's moving a little bit, like a Wimbley head or something like that, or something along those lines, the camera or the lens is smart enough to detect that it's off. Basically, read the freaking camera manual, understand what the ins and outs are. But for the most part, when I'm shooting on a tripod or a monopod, for me, my VR is turned off. Simple as that. VR does not fix the people shake. Okay? People forget about this all the time. They think that VR is just going to stop all the motion, is going to fix everything. They can shoot at whatever shutter speed that they want, and everything's going to be magically sharp. Guess what? It's not going to happen. Okay? The people shake, the people that you're photographing are not going to move, or are not going to be frozen by VR in the camera. That's impossible. The only way to do that is to increase your shutter speed or shorten the amount of time that the exposure is taken. That's it. It only fixes the camera shake, okay? Not the people shake or the subject shake or the runner moving from frame to frame or the race car going by. It does not affect them at all. The only way to stop them is with a faster shutter speed. So if you're already shooting a faster shutter speed, you don't need the VR. All right, another one. VR uses more battery. Simple as that. If you have it turned on and your battery's low, you're down at a quarter, another good reason to leave it off. All right? If you're over 1/500th of a second shutter speed, turn it off. You don't need it. The sampling rate in these lenses is something like 1/1000th of a second. That's not real fast, okay? It's not as fast as you would expect it to be. Basically, what's happening is there's a group of elements. There's a sensors and some element. It's holding one set of glass basically on the inside of the lens, and it's moving it in different positions in order to compensate for you moving left and right, up and down, all that stuff. So, in order for it to do that, it needs to sample at a certain rate. And so you're better off at a higher shutter speed to just turn it off. There's just going to be no good reason to need it because it's going to the shutter speed is already going to take care of the camera shake as well as the people shake because you're at a high shutter speed. At least it should be. Anyway, another reason why it could be an issue, and this is kind of getting nitpicky, and I understand that, but it can produce some odd bokeh and also soft edges on images. Because what happens especially on the Canon and on the Sigma lenses, what happens is the element could be off to one side. It might not be right in the center. And I'll explain the Nikon thing, why not Nikon in a second, but it could be a little bit off center, and that means you're not seeing seeing through the center of the element, and so that's obviously an issue. Now, why did I say that Nikon doesn't do that? Because Nikon, just before you shoot an image, the Nikon lenses will actually recenter that element and make it perfectly in the middle, and that will get rid of the soft edges. You can still have some odd bokeh, though, every once in a while on them, and you can also have some issues with composition. I remembered that one. So it could be, again, we're talking about, just a tiny, tiny little bit, but if you're really talking about some exact images and you want to be real precise with them, it could be an issue. Now, active versus normal VR. That's something else that most people have no idea what it is, what it does, if it's good or bad or what. So, bottom line, normal 99% of the time. And actually, if you're only shooting VR 10% of the time, that means that this is only 9% of the time, but you want it on normal the majority of the time you're using VR, okay? Just for the most part, put it on normal and forget it. But the one time when you do want to use one active is when something's moving underneath of you. If you're standing on a boat, if you're standing on a plane, if you're standing on a helicopter, if you're standing on a moving bridge, or a moving car, or something along those lines. Something that's moving underneath of you, that's moving you and the camera at the same rate, that's when you want to use the active mode. That's it. That's the only time that you want to use the active mode. The rest of the time, you want to be on normal. Alright, is VR worth the money? Simple answer, yes. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, the VR one is, an extra $500 or this or that or the other thing. Well, it's not just the VR that's making it worth more money. It's the new nano coatings. It's the faster autofocus. It's the better lens, this or that or the other thing. The better elements in there, and the less this and the better that. So there's a lot more than just the VR that's in that lens. So it's not like they took an old lens and just stuck VR in it. There's a lot more upgrades in that piece of glass than just that one thing. So keep that in mind. Yes, it is worth buying. On all lenses, I'm not a fan of using VR on any of my low-end glass. If the VR was on my 70-200 2.8, I would never use it. I don't think it's needed on a short lens. I only think it's needed on a long lens, on a 70-200 and longer. I don't think putting it on a 24-70, or for some stupid reason, like I think Canon puts it on like some 18-55 something or other. I just don't get it. I really don't understand. The other thing is about the marketing hype. Nikon does this, and I think Canon started doing this too, where they say, oh, well, you can hand hold an image that's 2 to 4 stops slower with VR versus not having VR. Okay, that's a bunch of crap. Because if you're at a 60th of a second already, do you really think you're going to be able to hand hold a quarter of a second, which is 4 stops slower, just by turning on VR? I don't think so. I might be able to handhold VR once in a while if I'm going to have a good day without VR. There's no way that you're going to be able to do it with VR turned on. It's not that good. It's just the way it is. Maybe in third, fourth generation VR that might change, but right now in second generation VR and IS, it's not going to get you down to a quarter of a second for hand holding. Get a tripod or bump up your ISO. Simple as that. So again, don't believe the marketing hype. But for the most part, it is worth buying. But I wouldn't use it on a short lens like that. I think it's worthless. So let's talk about some examples. First, shooting a baseball game at 10 a.m. Full sunlight, bright day, sunny day. Don't need VR. You probably want to have a fast shutter speed to stop the action, stop the ball in the air, stop the bat turning, as they're swinging. You probably don't want that VR. You don't need it because your shutter speed is probably already at 1,000, 2,000ths of a second. So no reason to use it. It's just using more battery, and you could have issues with bad bokeh like we talked about. So next, normal shooting with a 24 to 70 lens, a 1/125th of a second shutter speed. Like I talked about, normal lens, 1/125th, normal stuff. You're not moving fast. You don't have a fast moving subject. You don't need it. Leave it off. Shooting runners while standing on a bridge at dusk. Two things going on there. Number one, standing on a bridge, okay? That means you're moving as well as something, you're moving because you're standing on something, and that bridge might be jumping up and down or something because cars are going by, whatever it may be. Obviously, this is a really wild, made-up idea and subject, but still, it's a good example. So, in that case, I would use it, and I would turn on VR, and I would have it on active and not normal. All right. A couple other examples. Panning is actually one of those cases where most of the time you actually want it turned on. Panning you actually want to turn on. So the VR is actually made to help with your panning and fix that the motion blur, and it'll actually help. And so panning is one time where it's really, really good. The same with video. VR with video actually does help. There are plenty of examples out there on YouTube that'll show you video with and without VR, and it is a good one to use. So it's a good thing to use if you're shooting video with your DSLR. Finally, test, and then test some more. If you don't like what I had to say, go out and test it and come to your own conclusion. It's as simple as that. This is my conclusion after having VR lenses for 5 or 6 years, something like that. You know what? This is my conclusion. This is the way that I feel. This is the way that I shoot. And if you don't like my advice, well, then don't take it and go out and test it and see what you want to do. Figure out your way to do it and then go your way. Easy as that. But you know what? I still want to hear your comments. So, bottom line, know your equipment. Know how to turn it on. Know how to turn it off. Know your exposure. Know your everything. Because if you don't know that stuff, you're not going to go any farther. You're not going to advance in your photography without knowing your equipment, without knowing your exposure, without knowing the techniques, your composition, all those little things. And this is one of those little things that can just give you that tiny little edge and make your photos that little bit much better. And especially if you're an experienced photographer and you've been out there and you're just looking to make your images that tiny little bit much better, this can be one of those things that can add and improve. So keep that in mind. Questions, comments, concerns, I'd love to hear them. Oh, and don't forget, I want to hear what do you think about this format. All right? Greg Cazillo, Cazillo.com. Turn off your VR and keep shooting. See ya.